Cool. So we're here today with Ifeanyi, co-founder of ICE Commercial Power. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for expressing interest in the work that we're doing.
I mean, it's quite powerful what you guys want to do and your mission and vision. But maybe you can just tell the people that don't know you yet what ICE Commercial Power is doing.
Okay. So thanks again. ICE Commercial Power is essentially a solar microgrid company, but we operate in three separate verticals. We're looking to solve the power problem in Nigeria, which is a massive problem. But then we're also hoping to leverage technology and solving a technology problem. And we can talk about that a little bit later. And then we're also looking to solve a finance challenge as well. So those are three separate verticals. And with the solar problem, we recognize that Nigeria's economy has been slowed down drastically by lack of access to electricity. So by creating what's called microgrids for SME, small, medium enterprise clusters, we're able to provide power for businesses, hopefully saving them on their costs, allowing them to hire more people, creating more jobs, allowing them to produce more products that they can sell, whereby sort of driving economic activity.
Well, I think most people outside of Nigeria, or let me say outside of Africa, but definitely outside of Nigeria, might not realize how much of a challenge electricity, constant power supply actually is. And I think most people in the, let me say, Western world just take it for granted that your business has electricity 24/7. What is the reality for entrepreneurs on the ground at the moment?
Yeah, so the reality is Nigeria as a whole has 200 million people and has less electricity than Edinburgh, Scotland, which has about 500,000 people, right? So the country just doesn't produce that much electricity. And it's powered essentially by generators, which is, fossil burning. It's like powering your home with your car, right? It's inefficient, it's costly, and it just doesn't. It becomes like the most expensive way to power stuff. So that's the reality. And then you have about 36 million businesses, small businesses in Nigeria, right? So you have all these entrepreneurs that are trying to produce things and create exports, create value, and their single biggest obstacle is electricity, right? 83% of businesses in Nigeria say that access to electricity is their single biggest obstacle. That should not be the problem, especially in an economy where it's very difficult to access finance. They're still saying electricity is a bigger problem than getting a small business loan. That's an issue.
Wow. So you mentioned that you want to solve three problems actually. Let's go through them one by one and speak about how you want to tackle them.
Sure. So the easiest to start with is the electricity problem, right? So by creating microgrids where businesses can access lower cost electricity, sustainable, reliable electricity.
So microgrid means they have an electricity producing unit on site.
Exactly. Solar system, right? A solar microgrid. So a solar system that allows for a bunch of small businesses that are sharing the same building structure to share the same electricity source locally, right? Captive generation. So you have a bunch of these business clusters, commercial plazas, etc., where you have multiple businesses and they all share the same system. So in order to deliver this system effectively, that brings us to our second vertical, which is technology. We're leveraging what's called smart meter that allows us to distribute the electricity and monitor and regulate who's getting what electricity and how they're getting it. So this allows us to deliver the electricity effectively and also monitor reliably who's getting what. So in this vertical, we're also able to produce information about how much electricity are you consuming, giving customers the trust that they're getting what they're paying for.
So this did previously not really happen here. You could get a bill, but you would say, hey, I didn't consume that much, or you would consume that much, but you would never get a bill, or?
Yeah, so that's exactly it. And doing our research before we got started, we spoke to some distribution companies, and they mentioned that their single greatest obstacle in terms of scalability is getting customers to pay. The reason why customers aren't paying is because, I'm using a certain amount of electricity, my neighbor's using roughly the same amount of electricity, but our bills are completely different. So I have no faith in the system. I refuse to pay. But when I'm getting reliable information and it's saying this is exactly what I'm using, I'm able to pay. So the electricity company is able to collect their fees. That allows them to generate investments to scale, right? But if they can't reliably collect, then it doesn't make sense to continue to expand the grid. So there's no further investments going into the grid.
So the incentive to build more power supply is not given if you have to run after your money all the time.
Exactly.
And now that leads us to the third problem you're trying to solve, I think, right?
Yes. The third problem is a finance problem, right? So for a distribution company or a large utility company, they solve the financing because they're powering these large facilities so they can raise millions or billions of dollars. On our scale, we're solving for a very localized off-taker. So we're going to these business clusters and we're talking to 20 businesses, and we need to raise capital for these 20 businesses. So it's not the same scale as, a utility company. So we have to finance them directly, right? So in doing that, we recognize that another major issue why electricity doesn't proliferate is because access to financing is going to be another problem that people will face even after they have access to electricity. So we're like, how do we solve that now to kind of support scaling electricity? So we created a method of generating local financing for businesses, but in an economy where no one has credit history, they become significantly high risk to borrowing. So we realized that if we can securitize that debt and turn it into this structured finance, sophisticated product that we can sell to larger investors, this allows the risk profile to be decreased significantly, allowing for larger investors to participate in financing businesses for solar. So it's a little bit complex, but it's actually quite simple. I'll try and simplify it. So we'll take local financing from a local bank to fund businesses. Then once businesses have their power and they're paying, we can repackage that debt and sell it to a larger investor who has longer term patient capital than a local bank. We take his patient capital and repay the local bank, allowing the local bank to recapitalize and issue new loans.
Okay, so it means basically what you're trying to do is this more short-term loan that the bank would give you to be able to pay that back within a short amount of time and repackage that when there's also already a credit history with your customers into a product that big pension funds can buy, invest in, that think much more long term because they need this return over a long period of time.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's perfect.
Thank God I understood it.
Figured it out. It's perfect.
But I'm a big fan. My first question was, or actually just what came to my mind, if you can do that for electricity, could that also be applied in other sectors that
Absolutely.
also need investment and that have challenges proliferating as need be because of credit history and challenges in the market?
Yeah, so quite frankly, sophisticated economies, like the US, Germany, etc., run on financial structures like this, right? But in the African economy, that's very new to sort of sophisticated banking. In fact, new to any sort of banking. I used to come and visit 5 years ago and everyone was in cash, right? Didn't trust banks. You're running around, money's under your mattress, Now there's banking, you have POS machine, all of that, right? So we're trying to take it to the next level in advancing sort of the sophistication of banking, where, okay, you have funds within a bank, you're demonstrating some history with, financial institutions, then when you're paying ICE or you're paying any type of consistent receivable, then you're building some type of history or credit profile. So anything you buy in Nigeria, there's almost no subscription. It's like whatever you own, it's yours. Your house, it's yours. Your car, it's yours. There's no credit, there's no borrowing. It's all, you pay cash. Whatever you have that's yours, it's all yours, right? So there is some comfort that comes from that, but it doesn't allow you to grow as an economy if you have to save up all of your money to buy a house or a car before you can own one, right? If you look at some of these guys that, operate taxis or Ubers, right? If you have to save up all the money to buy the first car, you can't even, this car is a revenue generating source. This car is job for you, right? But it's so much easier if you can borrow money to own the car, and with the money that you're making, you can pay off the car over time. It's just so much more effective than having to wait 5 years to save up enough money to buy the car and then start making money. And it becomes even harder to save up money to buy the car if you don't have a revenue generating source. So for example, for folks who are, running taxi services, if you can lend them funds for a car, you can repackage the payments that they're paying for these cars and securitize that. And, you can start a car rental leasing service, a car leasing service, right? Or auto financing. Auto financing works the same way, right? In the U.S., you never buy the car outright. You almost never completely pay for the car. Before you're done paying, you upgrade to a new car, right? Like you're always kind of in a perpetual credit cycle, right? And that just allows the economy to work, and that doesn't happen here.
So how much cash flow do you need to have from your customers before you can securitize this stream of cash flow?
Right.
At what, how big does the volume have to be before that comes relevant and pension funds or someone else becomes interested?
Okay, so you're getting into the sausage a little bit. So the very basic component that we look at is 5 million assets under management, right? In terms of sort of how long do we want to see payment history or like the structure of the product, some of that is proprietary because we're working with consulting firms to kind of like structure and design some of these instruments. And as we're designing that, there could be some sort of IP that comes out of it.
Yeah.
So some of that is still sort of in development under wraps, but generally the structure is pretty straightforward, right? And the thinking is straightforward. You want to make it make sense for like legal and advisory services because it's very expensive to put together this type of instrument, right? So if you're doing it for $1,000 loan, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? But if you're doing it for a $5 million loan, then the fees will make more sense. And then pension funds have billions of dollars in any economy, right? They're literally pooling together all of like the retirement funds for their entire citizens. So they don't want to get into a $1 million investment. They want to get into much larger investment products. So for it to make sense to them, you want to get into the 5 to 10 to 20 million and up in order for that to make sense.
Which leads me to my next question. You guys are still considering yourself a startup, I guess, right?
Yes, we're still very much a startup. We're looking to, close a $5 million round by the end of this year. I think we would still consider ourselves a startup. I think we embrace the ideology of being a startup because we always want to continue innovating. And I think, so whether or not, we would be considered a startup or not, I think we would still want to consider ourselves a startup. We sort of wear that hat, the t-shirt and jeans and like the grittiness because I very early on, once we got started, I had an investor tell me, if I ever see a co-founder in a suit, I would never invest in that guy, right? And I think, having done this for about 3 years now, I've come to understand that it's grueling stuff, like 24 hours a day. You're taking calls at 3 in the morning because, it's like what needs to be done has to be done. It's just how long does it take you to do it, right? So it all depends on how much time and commitment you put into it. So the more you embrace sort of that grittiness in your approach, the easier it is for you to get to where you need to go faster.
So you and your co-founders, you start this business. Your vision is to work through these structured instruments with pension funds and get them to basically finance the electricity revolution in Africa, let me say, or Nigeria. And where do you start? How do you launch something like this? Because you have to start somewhere, right? 5 million assets under management, you said, to be interesting to these big investors, institutional investors. But yet, then where do you start?
Yeah. So we start with, one grid, right? In 2017, we started with one grid and one site, and we're at about 30 sites, right? And, you look at, so in the first year we did one site, second year we did 30 sites, and then next year we're looking to do about 300 sites, and then the year after that, about 10,000 is the target, right? So it goes exponentially higher like every time. Because you get more efficient in what you're doing, you're able to identify more sites, and you just get better at what you're doing. Initially, it's very much a pilot, like, hey, let's see, we tested the technology. The technology makes sense, it works, solar works, we have customers that want to pay. Then you want to gauge the customer appetite, right? Are people willing to buy electricity? Because some people are not willing to buy electricity, right? Like if you go to parts of India, people feel like it's a given right that they should have electricity for free. So you want to test, okay, what's the consumer appetite? So you test for that, and then you advance and you're like, okay, well, what's the scalability, right? Can we operate a wide area and still maintain controls and have a system that works regardless of whether it's in this state or it's in the north or it's in the east? So as we solve for these challenges, we'll understand better what the market is telling us.
All right, so I understand. So you start with supplying or solving the first two problems. You give sites or businesses electricity,
right,
selected ones, and you solve the technology problem, testing, okay, what information do we have to get, how do we get it, are customers willing to pay, and all these things. So you're solving the first two problems first.
Right.
How do you solve the third problem in the meantime, while you don't have this institutional investments? How do you finance these first projects?
Yeah, so we raised seed capital, pre-seed, angel investments came in. We were able to kind of like raise some smaller amounts that will allow us to get some of the sites up. And then we made partnerships with local banks to test with like a small loan, right? So the bank, we have a partnership with Sterling Bank. They give us a small loan. So they're looking to see, okay, what does this loan do over the year, right? And then next year, we increase that limit, right? And then we bring in other banks, and we're able to demonstrate, even as us, that we have credit history and a profile of like, this is what we're doing. So it's a gradual it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So this is going to be a long, drawn-out process. But I think at a certain point, when you hit that critical mass, then it's like, okay, we have a turnkey solution, and it just sort of goes from site to site, and you're able to kind of do what it does. You're able to submit, this is the paperwork, these are the receivables, this is what people are paying, and you're able to kind of put together all that data, and you're now receiving big data from all your customers, and it de-risks the profile the larger you grow, right? Because if I test 10 people, right, you're going to get variable information. If I test 10,000 people, it becomes predictable.
Wow. I mean, it's really blowing my mind. You try to make an entire industry here in Nigeria investable.
Yes. So essentially, this is really the problem that we're solving, right? And I think you're quite good at getting to the heart of the matter. So essentially, we came here to solve an economic problem. Solar was just the first and the best vehicle to approach that problem. But ultimately, we felt that Nigeria is literally the most populated country in Africa, largest economy in Africa, but it's largely natural resource rich, which is unsustainable, right? And it's bad for the economy, right? Because natural resources are finite. So how do you get people producing things? Production is sustainable, right? All the economies that manufacture have always done well, right? So when you can get people to produce things, especially in Africa where you have so much talent and you have so many people that are looking for things to do and so many visionaries, give them a platform to create and produce things. And I think you will see the identity of Nigeria and Africa change over time. But one thing we hadn't figured out is the economic and finance challenge, right? Because in order to create something in a capitalist market, you need capital, right? And capital doesn't move here, right? So you want to create ease and access to capital, and then everything sort of moves from there. So we're really solving an economic problem.
Wow. I mean, it's tying so many things together for me from, other interviews that we had. Manufacturers, that say, it's unsustainable to just ship out our natural resources without adding value to them, and then buying it back at a much larger price. It makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
But now what these people also mentioned, that it's challenging, and you're trying to really lay the foundation for people to build their businesses on.
So that's what we're trying to lay, right? There's so many issues. You can blame government, you can blame corruption. All of those are really tied to the same problem, right? It's a natural resource curse. When you have natural resources, they get extracted by the guy who's at the top, and he's not really concerned about the people at the bottom because they're not instrumental in him extracting these resources. So there's a disconnect between leadership and their people. When you create an economy that's built off of productivity, all the value is in the people. So you have to work with the people, you have to pay attention to the people, you have to collaborate with the people, and that's when you start to have better leadership, because leadership is dependent on the value that's being created by its people. So that we want to put the power back in the people, empower the people.
How did you arrive at that point where you said, okay, this needs to be done, and I'm the one to do it with such a big vision? How did that happen?
So it started with when I was back in New York, and I was working at JP Morgan on Wall Street, and I identified a problem in Nigeria, and I'd always been sort of connected to Nigeria, my birth country, but having grown up and spent almost my whole life in the US, I felt like I had gotten to a point in my career where the value was sort of the value growth was incremental, right? And I needed more growth, right? So I recognized that I needed to do something that I was deeply passionate about, right? And doing something, and I'd already sort of reached a point where I felt like doing what I needed to do. I derived enough satisfaction from that. I needed to challenge myself a little bit more. But then it wasn't just about me. It was about, this was a problem that needed to be solved. And I would have been more than happy to allow whoever is capable of solving it, solve it. But once I did the reverse engineering on the math, I recognized that, there's not going to be more people that are going to decide who have sort of had the exposure of growing up in the West and sort of the background of, working in, finance and understanding economics and, the relationships that I've built, that would have the same level of interest in going back to Nigeria and creating this kind of change if they weren't already Nigerian, right? So that narrowed it down to myself and a few people that I knew, and I said, let's collaborate and let's do something about this. And I was super ecstatic that they were 100% on board, and I give them credit, because it's really like my co-founders, who I believe I always felt were even smarter than I am and even more driven than I am, that made me more confident to approach this. And I think and I thank them every day. I think they're phenomenal guys for also recognizing that this needed to be done and being able to contribute in the way that they have.
Wow, I love that that you share that, because you go from a point where you're like, okay, this should be done in Nigeria.
Right.
Why is no one doing it?
Right.
And then you're like, oh gosh, it should be me that should be doing this, because how many other people have been in investment banking or banking, come from the continent, have the connection there. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. No, I mean, it just, it was really kind of an aha moment, if you will. And again, I had never viewed myself as an entrepreneur or anything. It was just the confidence of like, the partners that I knew and felt like would be able to kind of jump on board and do this, that kind of like gave me, the confidence to kind of move forward. And, really brilliant guys. And from there, ideas just started to flow, and we're like, hey, listen, we went from thinking about maybe selling solar backpacks to college kids to like, hey, why don't we do larger grids? And then why don't we securitize these loans? Why don't we create access to finance? And we were just like, the ideas just kept flowing, and it became, this massive idea. So I'm just super fortunate to have been part of this idea creation.
And so that also means, I mean, you got interested in this bigger challenge, but then it was still bouncing ideas around from solar backpacks, which can do so much. Is a great story to tell, but won't solve the problem. To hey, why don't we think this bigger?
Yeah, absolutely.
Creative process.
Absolutely, that was it. And I love the exchange of ideas. That's just something I get excited about. I like to kind of imagine, like grand ideas. I like to imagine like a better Africa, and I mean, especially when I come back and I visit, and I'm like, the only thing that separates me and my experience from some of these other guys that maybe are less fortunate is, my father was fortunate enough to go to college in the U.S. And from there, I had access to growing up in the United States, right? And sort of seeing global exposure. And I don't see, I don't see myself as better than anyone here. It's just access to that opportunity, I felt, is something that I want to present to other people. And I know that if we're able to succeed in this, you're going to see much greater leaders than myself emerge from having access to the opportunity.
Was there ever any doubt or fear? I mean, you're going from a super high-paid job, I'm sure, to, okay, now I'm a founder in Nigeria. What did friends, parents say, and what was going on in your own mind? Yeah,
so even my parents from Nigeria, I think, thought that I was crazy, at least, at first. They're like, let's go over this again. I think it wasn't until, very early on, and we were fortunate, right? I actually didn't discuss it with my parents because they probably would have talked me out of it. But we were fortunate enough to compete at a Harvard Business School competition. And then we ended up winning $5,000. And, before the competition was when I informed my family. I was like, hey, look, I'm in this Harvard Business School thing. If you want to come, you should come check it out. And they were like, wait, what? What? And then, I was able to say, yeah, there's this business that I'm working on. And it was easier to communicate it that way. But I'm glad that it worked out that way. Otherwise, it would be a completely different story. But yeah, so we were fortunate enough to achieve early success from, conceptually. And that led us into other success because we were able to meet Microsoft at that event. And that's led to a partnership that we now have with Microsoft, which is one of our, longest standing relationships. And we're working on some really exciting concepts with them. So we're just really, really fortunate in our track, right? It could have been totally different. What is it, like 95% of businesses fail after the first year. The remaining, 99% or whatever fail after 3 years. So fingers crossed, right? We're, still pushing.
Yeah, great. Man, I have many more questions to ask, but for the sake of time, if you could pick any partner to partner with, who would that be and what would you ask them for?
Oh, wow, that's a good one. So initially, the first thing that came to mind was Elon Musk. And that's just because he's doing a lot of work in the same space. He's also African. But I feel like I should be a little bit more creative with it, I don't know, maybe maybe Diddy, P Diddy, right? So I think I like to think outside of the box, right? And I think P Diddy has a way of like galvanizing sort of like the black population to do things, even to go and vote, right? Some of the like largest voting turnouts came from, you know, when P Diddy held like a campaign, vote or die. And I think from an outreach standpoint, I think and able to like galvanize people to get them to understand part of what we're doing in terms of like driving economic progress and like changing the narrative of Africa requires a lot of belief from its people to understand that like there is a change coming. That kind of growth requires a lot of buy-in from your people, right? A lot of the issues that stem in Nigeria currently come from people who don't believe that there's a bright future, right? There's a lot of cynicism. People are like, you know, government sucks, everything sucks. So to get, you know, like a voice, you know, like Diddy, who can come in and like sort of galvanize that message and say, we're going to do something. And he has a track record of success in multiple different businesses, different fields that have absolutely nothing to do with each other. I think, you know, he would be a great person to work with.
I love that, because, you know, the simple answer is always, well, I would partner with someone that could give me money.
Yeah.
But, you know, that is not necessarily the biggest value that you can draw.
Right.
Touching hearts and minds of people,
yeah,
and bringing hope and mobilizing human energy in form of creativity or labor is the true power, if you will, of creating something in the world. Final question: what would be your advice to a young Nigerian today?
Oh, wow, you got the good stuff. To a young Nigeria today, I would say they should be truly grateful, because I believe that the future is brighter, right? They're growing up in a time where there's access to social media, there's internet, there's broader exposure without leaving the borders, right? And there's people like myself who are coming back and contributing value, right? There's this great resource extraction where mass migration was happening from the 70s, 80s, 90s, where all the talent left, right? Talent is coming back. Take advantage of that and don't be cynical. Believe that there is an opportunity to contribute, right? So, and every action you take has consequences, right? If you take the easy way out and you know, lie, cheat, or steal, that sets off a chain of events where whoever you did that from is now less optimistic about Nigeria, and maybe they lie, cheat, and steal, and then it proliferates through society. But if you stand up, you know, for progress, and you're like, I'm going to work hard and I'm going to contribute productively to society, that also contributes positively, and that's the only way you're going to create real value, right? And that has to be the mindset.
Thank you so much for sharing. Love this.
Thank you so much.
More power to you.
I greatly appreciate your time.